Where'd you get your bonds?
The Federal Reserve has cut its key interest rate here, the lowest level on record.
Interest rate
The federal funds rate, the interest that banks charge.
Crisis will happen.
The biggest fiscal stimulus we have ever seen.
And that'll solve the problem. We're in the midst of a serious financial crisis, and the federal government is responding with decisive action. We boosted confidence in money market.
Have you taken a large home loan? Or did you put your savings in stocks, mutual funds, or bonds? If not, then you can relax. But all of us who did are living on borrowed time. This is the story of the greatest financial crisis of our time, the one that is on its way.
They spent hundreds of billions of dollars to show that they were doing something, but not properly designed and not as effective as it should have been.
When they start losing money, hey, we got to get back in the game. We got to get those dice rolling again. Hey, let's create another bubble. You think the dot-com bubble was too big? We got a bigger one for you. We'll call it the real estate and the credit.
Well, the problem is they never actually cure the crisis, right? They just give alcohol to a drunk. It doesn't sober him up. It just, sets him up for, a bigger hangover. And that's all we've done. And that's all we're trying to do. And so I know at some point you kill the patient, right? At some point you can't drink anymore. It's just the end of it. You reach the end of the ability. And that's where we are.
Congress wanted to believe them. Congress wanted an excuse to bail out the auto workers. And the executives gave them just enough political cover to say, well, I'm not really doing this because I want auto worker votes and I'm going to give them a huge amount of money. I'm really doing this for the American economy.
The Federal Reserve has cut its key interest rate, the lowest level on record. The federal
So the solution is the problem. That's why we had a problem in the first place. And this is the danger in protecting investors and consumers from the consequences of their own decisions.
We can do it, but we need to do it soon, because the clock is ticking and time is not working in our favor.
I know many Americans have questions tonight. How did we reach this point in our economy? And what does this mean for your financial future? These are good questions, and they deserve clear answers. And they deserve clear answers. First, how did our economy...
The foundations of our free society remain sound, and I am confident that we will recover and prosper as we have in the past.
Immediately after 9/11, the President of the United States, George W. Bush, told the people to be good Americans and go out and shop. But how are they going to do it? You're in a recession. The Federal Reserve comes to the rescue.
Let me come home crying over something, and she'd give me candy every time.
When you see the stock market come down and the real estate bubble burst, all that phony wealth is going to evaporate. And all that's going to be left is all the debt that we accumulated to foreigners.
Peter Schiff is another analyst who was roundly mocked when he predicted a crisis for the U.S. economy in the midst of the boom.
We went on an unprecedented global spending binge. American citizens borrowed and spent trillions of dollars to buy stuff. And that is why we're in so much trouble. It was because we got drunk on all that fed alcohol. Fed alcohol. Fed alcohol.
I do believe in the American dream. I believe there is such a thing as the American dream. Owning a home is a part of that dream. It just is. Right here in America, if you own your own home, you're realizing the American dream.
Vernon Smith was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002. He received it for his research in experimental economics. In his experiments, he puts economic theories to the test. Smith is an expert on bubbles.
If you can buy a home with almost nothing down, then you do well if the prices continue to go up. If it goes down, well, then you have an incentive to walk away from it and let the bank have it.
Low interest rates caused a housing bubble. Cheap loans encouraged people to buy more and bigger homes. Housing prices began to rise by 10% a year. So many took out a second mortgage on their old house to fund consumption.
You want to go on that vacation? Buy some new clothes? How about put an addition on your house? You don't have the money? How about a home equity loan? That's for you. Let's use your house as a piggy bank.
The banks granted loans to almost anyone. Why would you need a decent income to buy a home if you can get rich just living in it? The market even coined the term Nina loans. No income, no assets, no problem. You'll get a loan anyway.
The legislation was more aggressively pushing lenders to lend to people of modest means, people whose incomes were 80% of the median income or below.
Politicians encouraged this. For a long time, both the left and the right have been encouraging home ownership. So they've created deductions, subsidies and insurances. And they created two huge mortgage financing companies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Their job was to use thousands of billions of dollars to insure loans for people who couldn't get them on the open market. They were government-sponsored enterprises. They had private owners, but they had been created by Congress, and their transactions were guaranteed by the government.
You know, there was a huge moral hazard, courtesy of the government in the mortgage market. When the government, through Fannie and Freddie, started to guarantee mortgages, then the lenders were no longer worried about getting their money back because the government said, we guarantee.
Overall, the U.S. economy appears likely to expand at a moderate pace over the second half of 2007, with growth then strengthening a bit in 2008 to a rate close to the economy's underlying trend.
The dominoes started falling. Investors stopped buying mortgage-backed securities and refused to lend to those who depended on them. Investment banks like Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers suddenly couldn't get new loans to stay in business. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac could no longer hide the disaster. The financial crisis started in a way that is eerily similar to today's situation. It started with an economic crisis in the US and a government that responded decisively. After 9/11 and the dot-com collapse, the US government decided to save the economy by inflating a new bubble. Today, the world is trying to get out of the financial crisis by inflating a new bubble. The difference is that this bubble is much bigger.
After they did the dot-com bubble, and that burst, and they reinflated it with the real estate and credit crisis bubble, and then when that burst, now they've created the bubble of all bubbles. And it's not only the United States, this is a global bubble. They're all into it. It's called the bailout bubble. Hey, the economy's going down, recession setting in, sales don't look good, exports soft, need more money? How about we'll call it stimulus packages? And from Australia to the United States, from the UK to China, they're dumping funny money into the system to keep it going.
CBS News Special Report, a presidential address to the nation. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Katie Couric.
Good evening, everyone. President Bush asked the networks for this television time so he could talk directly to you about a national crisis. Some of this country's major financial institutions are in danger of collapsing under the weight of bad mortgages, and that would be devastating for the entire economy.
We are in the midst of a serious financial crisis, and the federal government is responding with decisive action. Under our proposal, the federal government would put up to $700 billion taxpayer dollars on the line to purchase troubled assets that are clogging the financial system.
The US government wants to spend huge amount on Wall Street banks to cover their bad deals. Even banks who don't want the money will be forced to take it, so that the public won't know which banks are on the brink of collapse.
All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The ayes have it.
Speaker. I want to thank the Secretary of the Treasury for working hard with the members. I thank the members for working long hours like they've been doing to come up with a solution that's bipartisan and that'll solve the problem.
On October 3rd, Congress approves the biggest financial bailout in history. $700 billion. Around the world, in Germany, Italy, Canada, South Korea and Great Britain, other politicians do the same to save their banks.
We've taken the right, the decisive and the tough decision that was necessary to protect the stability of the financial system and to protect the depositors.
David Walker was US Comptroller General from 1998 to 2008. He quit because he was so worried about the US economy that he wanted to have the freedom to warn about what may happen.
In my view, the bailout was necessary in certain regards, but in many cases we wasted a lot of money because we didn't do three things. First, have clearly defined objectives about what we were trying to achieve. Secondly, have criteria established up front as to who would get the money and who wouldn't get the money. And number three, have conditions established up front as to what they could and couldn't do with the money. And as a result of not having those three things, some people got the money that didn't deserve it. Other people got the money that didn't make good use of it. And as a result, we had a lot of waste with regard to tax.
We are running out of the traditional ammunition that's used in a recession, which is to lower interest rates. They're getting to be about as low as they can go.
The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act that I will sign today, a plan that meets the principles I laid out in January, is the most sweeping economic recovery package in our history.
On February 7th, 2009, Obama approves a stimulus package worth $787 billion. With the Bush stimulus package from the year before, U.S. politicians have now spent close to $1 trillion to stimulate the U.S. economy. The money is spent on roads, airports, education, unemployment, and other benefits.
We had a $787 billion stimulus bill, but only about 1/3 of it was truly stimulus. By that I mean timely, targeted, and temporary. The other 2/3 were things that people wanted to do, had been wanting to do for a long time, but they didn't want to have to pay for it. They wanted to do it as part of emergency legislation and charge it to the national credit.
And that's where we are. I think at this point, the problem is now so big that government stimulus is not going to, buy us another 5 or 6 years of phony growth like it did last time. Because we have to accumulate so much more debt now. Because the bigger the problem gets, the more we have to stimulate to get that short-term boost. But now the bigger the bust, because now we have a bigger stimulus, to get out of the economy.
About a year after the worst economic crisis in modern history, Lehman Brothers is gone. But apart from that, Wall Street looks much the same. Many banks are reporting record profits. The world's stock markets have skyrocketed. The market is finally breathing a sigh of relief. But isn't it somewhat uncomfortable? Haven't we been here before? All the measures that we have taken to save the economy, the low interest rates, the massive debt, the safety net for the financial industry, these are the very things that led us into a crisis in the first place. We've been saved from the consequences of one burst bubble by inflating 100 new ones all over the world.
One year ago, I took office amid 2 wars, an economy rocked by a severe recession, a financial system on the verge of collapse, and a government deeply in debt. Experts from across the political spectrum warned that if we did not act, we might face a second depression. So we acted, immediately and aggressively. And 1 year later, the worst of the storm has passed.
The U.S. government has launched bailouts, stimulus packages and guarantees to the tune of $10,000 billion.
Caught myself wondering for the 100th time how the hell I got here. What the hell I'm doing here.
That's more than the total cost to the U.S. government for World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the invasion of Iraq, the New Deal, the Marshall Plan, and the moon landing. Bush almost racked up more U.S. debt than all presidents before him combined, from George Washington to Bill Clinton. And Obama is almost creating greater debt than all presidents before him, including George W. Bush. But it's not just the U.S. that's increasingly looking like a house of cards. During the crisis, many governments went deeply into debt. Estimates say that the average debt in the richest nations will exceed 100% by the year 2011. These are loans taken at currently low interest rates. Should the interest rate rise by 1%, the U.S. interest payments will rise by $100 billion per year. In September 2008, the bankruptcy of one large investment bank brought the world economy to its knees. The fate of Lehman Brothers raised the question of who was next in line, so everyone avoided doing business with banks. How will the world react if the next entity to declare bankruptcy is a nation? Who is next in line if that were to happen? Some houses of cards have already started falling. This is Iceland, until recently one of the richest nations in the world. When the crisis hit, the Icelandic banks collapsed. The Icelandic stock market crashed, leaving the debt with a small population. For the first time in 50 years, this peaceful country saw riots. This is Greece. Here, deficits have hit a record high. The national debt is approaching 135% of GDP. The market wants higher interest rates for Greek loans, increasing the pressure on its strained economy. It seems like the Greek government needs a bailout to avoid collapse. Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Great Britain are other EU nations with similar problems. What about my country, Sweden? The country's finances are fairly robust. Our national debt and deficit are lower than that of most nations. But Sweden is highly dependent on the world economy. More than half of our prosperity is based on exports. When other countries crash, we get hit almost as hard. And Swedish housing prices have risen during the crisis, despite the recession and despite rising unemployment. But because of low interest rates and a government mortgage company, SBAB, making loans easier to get. Swedes have never carried more debt in relation to their income. Doesn't all of this sound very familiar?
We have new bubbles everywhere, so I am pretty worried about what's going to happen.
If you don't want bubbles to burst, then don't blow them up in the first place, because all bubbles burst.
If enough things can go wrong, some of them probably will. The question is just which needle will burst this bubble? Will it be new credit losses as banks take on greater risks, knowing that the government considers them too big to fail? Or falling stock prices as interest rates rise and the steroids wear off? Will it be the Chinese economy overheating? Or will it be a collapse of confidence in the US dollar?
If we lose the confidence of our foreign lenders, and we must not allow that to happen, but if that were to happen, then there would be a dramatic decline in the dollar, a dramatic increase in interest rates, significant fueling of inflation, a very, very deep recession and possibly depression that would be felt around the world. We must not allow that to happen.
When the next bubble bursts, you cannot use the same emergency measures. You can't lower interest rates that are already at rock bottom. You can't stimulate the economy with borrowed money if an excessive national debt is the cause of the crisis. The governments could save the banks, but who can save the governments?
Ultimately, there is going to be a price all around the world to be paid for this. And the longer it continues, the bigger that price is going to be.
You know, this really is a moral question. I mean, I can give you plenty of big and bad numbers. You know, when you talk about tens of trillions of dollars, it's just hard to imagine. But you have to put a face on it. And to me, I put my children's and my grandchildren's face on it. It's their future that we're mortgaging.
When we tell people that there's going to be a bailout bubble, and they see the world equity markets up 50, 60%, they don't want to believe that it's another bubble. They want to step right up back to that table and throw their dice and try to win their hand at the wheel of fortune that Wall Street's spinning. So people still don't want to believe that the worst is yet to come.
It's easy to think of these predictions as much too gloomy. But that is exactly what people said the last time. When these experts predicted the 2008 financial crisis, they were laughed at in the media.
You guys are deluding yourself.
We can do it, but we need to do it soon because the clock is ticking and time is not working in our favor.